Picture this scenario. You and your partner are sitting at the kitchen table on a Sunday night, both of your laptops open, both of your spreadsheets glowing. You've both got jobs. Good jobs. Between you, you're pulling in close to $140,000 a year. You're doing everything right. You got the degrees. You built the careers. You have the two incomes everyone told you was the goal. And yet somehow, at the end of every single month, there is barely anything left. The emergency fund you planned to build 3 years ago still has a few $100s in it. The retirement contributions you keep meaning to increase still haven't moved. You're not vacationing in Europe or buying designer bags or living recklessly. You can't even point to anything excessive. And still, you're looking at each other across that table with the same unspoken question that hung in the air last month and the month before that: where does all the money go? My name is Felicia, and I built this channel because I got tired of watching smart, hardworking women, especially Black women, do everything society told them to do and still end up financially vulnerable when it mattered most. If you have ever sat at that kitchen table wondering why two incomes don't feel like two incomes, hit that subscribe button right now, because what I'm about to share will reframe everything you thought you understood about financial security. And if this video helps you see your situation with new eyes, give it a thumbs up. It helps me reach more women who need to hear this. Here's what nobody told you when you were hustling to build that dual income life. Having two paychecks coming in doesn't automatically mean you're more financially secure than the households that came before you. In fact, the research suggests it might mean exactly the opposite. And this isn't some fringe economic theory. This finding came from a Harvard Law School bankruptcy professor named Elizabeth Warren, who spent decades studying why middle-class families were filing for bankruptcy in numbers that made no sense. Warren wasn't asking why poor people were going broke. She was asking why solidly middle-class families, people with college degrees and real careers and two incomes, were ending up in financial ruin at historically unprecedented rates. What she found turned the conventional wisdom on its head. Families with two incomes were going broke faster and more catastrophically than single-income families a generation earlier. Not because they were spending recklessly, not because they were living beyond their means in ways that made intuitive sense: big vacations, luxury cars, closets full of clothes. In fact, adjusted for inflation, two-income families were spending less on clothing, less on food, less on appliances, and less on dining out than single-income families had spent decades before. Less. Not more. Less. So the overconsumption story that we love to tell about broke people, the narrative that says if you just stop buying lattes and eating avocado toast, you'd be financially free. It was completely empirically wrong. And yet these families were more financially fragile than the generation before them. How is that possible? The answer is where the money was actually going. It wasn't the discretionary spending. It was the fixed expenses, the costs you absolutely cannot cut when something goes wrong. The mortgage, the car payments, plural, because two jobs often means two cars, the health insurance, the childcare. All of those costs had inflated dramatically, and families had committed both of their incomes to covering them. And then Elizabeth Warren and her daughter identified something that I think is one of the most genuinely clarifying ideas in personal finance. The second income wasn't freeing these families. It was funding a bidding war. Because when both partners entered the workforce and household incomes rose, prices rose to match them. Families used the second income to compete for houses in better school districts, to pay for the childcare that made the second income possible in the first place, to manage the two cars and two commutes that two jobs require. The fixed necessities inflated to absorb exactly the additional income that was supposed to create breathing room. By Warren's calculation, today's two-income family earns 75% more money than the single-income household of a generation ago, but has 25% less discretionary income once those fixed bills are paid. 75% more income, 25% less freedom. That is the trap. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. But here's where the two-income trap becomes genuinely dangerous, and it's a dimension that gets almost no attention in mainstream financial conversations. In that old one-income model, the one we love to dismiss as outdated and regressive, there was something economists call the added worker effect. If the primary breadwinner lost their job, got sick, or became disabled, the partner who'd been managing the household could enter the workforce. That stay-at-home parent was the reserve capacity, the backup plan, the economic cushion built right into the family structure. It wasn't perfect. It was built on unpaid women's labor and the subordination of women's careers and aspirations. We should be honest about that. But it functioned as insurance and as a hedge, as a safety net that didn't cost anything extra. When you have two incomes and both of them are fully committed to covering your fixed expenses, that safety net disappears. You might be sitting there thinking, but Felicia, two incomes is still two incomes. If we lose one, we still have the other one. And I used to think the same thing until I saw the numbers for what they actually were. Stanford economists tested Warren's thesis by linking census data to actual bankruptcy filing records. And what they found was striking. Two-earner couples were about 10% more likely to file for bankruptcy than similar single-earner households, not because they started with less money, but because of the structure they'd built. When one income disappears in a two-income household where both incomes are fully committed, you don't lose half your financial picture. You lose the margin. You lose the buffer. You lose the ability to absorb a shock without immediately going into crisis. The mortgage was set when you had two paychecks. The car payment was set when you had two paychecks. The private daycare, the insurance premiums, the gym memberships that feel necessary because both of you are stressed, all of that was sized for two incomes. And when one paycheck stops, none of those bills get smaller. They stay exactly where they are. And the family that looked financially comfortable from the outside suddenly has a single income trying to cover a two-income lifestyle with zero runway. That is when bankruptcy happens. That is when the foreclosure notice comes. That is when the family that was doing everything right finds itself in a crisis nobody saw coming because they were too busy earning to notice the structural fragility they'd built. Here is the thing that I want you to sit with for a moment because it reframes how you should be thinking about your household finances entirely. Emergency preparedness is not just about having a savings account. It's about the ratio of your fixed obligations to your income at any given moment. According to the Federal Reserve's most recent survey on household economics, 30% of American adults, 30% could not cover 3 months of expenses by any means if they lost their primary income source. Not by borrowing, not by selling assets, not by any method. And this is happening in households with mortgages and health insurance and retirement accounts, which on the surface look perfectly respectable. The two-income trap is a trap precisely because it looks like success from the outside while hiding the brittleness underneath. Two good careers, a nice house, good school district, well-dressed kids, and one job loss away from a financial catastrophe. Now let's talk about childcare, because this is where the math of the two-income household breaks down most completely and most women feel it most acutely. In 2024, the national average cost of childcare was $13,128 per year for a single child. That is the average across the whole country, including rural areas and lower-cost regions. In major metropolitan areas, Atlanta, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, the places where professional jobs actually concentrate, you're looking at annual childcare costs that regularly top $20,000, or $25,000 per child. The government's own standard says childcare is affordable when it costs no more than 7% of your household income. But the actual median amount families are paying has reached 24% of household income, 24%, for one child. 60% of parents are spending 20% or more of their income on childcare alone. Nearly half of all parents surveyed in 2024 spent more than $1,500 per month on childcare costs, $18,000 per year for their family. And here's what this does to the actual math of the second income, the one that's supposed to be building your financial stability. If you are the second earner in your household and you make $55,000 or $60,000 a year, which is a reasonable professional income in many fields, you might feel like you're contributing a significant amount to the household. But let's actually subtract the cost that your income requires. Federal and state taxes on that $60,000 calculated at the marginal rate in a joint filing, not at the base rate, because your income is taxed on top of your partner's income, might run you $14,000 to $18,000. Child care for one child in a child care center in a mid-sized city, $14,000 to $18,000. If you have two children, $24,000 to $32,000. Transportation, a car payment, insurance, gas, or public transit plus rideshare, maybe $3,500 to $6,000. Work-related clothing and grooming, because professional environments have real costs, $1,500 to $2,500. Convenient spending that two-earner households almost universally slide into the takeout 3 nights a week because everyone is exhausted. The grocery delivery because nobody has time, the cleaning service, the dry cleaning conservatively $4,000 to $6,000 per year. You do that full subtraction, and for a significant number of families, especially those with young children in expensive cities, the second income nets out to somewhere between $10,000 and nothing, sometimes negative. And both people are working full-time, both people are exhausted. The household has double the schedule load, double the commutes, double the work stress, and financially it may be operating exactly where it would have been with one income. This is where the trap gets really painful to look at directly. I want to be clear about something because I do not want anyone to hear me saying that women should leave the workforce. That is not what I'm saying, and that is not what the data is saying. The decision to work or not to work involves much more than a net income calculation. It involves career trajectory, professional identity, long-term earning power, Social Security credits, benefits, and the simple reality that financial independence requires income. What I am saying is this: too many women make the decision to keep working on the assumption that their income is fully contributing to the household's financial progress, without ever actually doing the math to find out what their income is truly netting. And that absence of real information, that gap between what the paycheck looks like and what it actually contributes after expenses, is how the two-income trap stays hidden. You feel like you're ahead because two incomes should mean ahead, but the numbers tell a different story, and you deserve to know the real numbers. Here's where the situation becomes specifically devastating for women. And I need you to stay with me on this because this layer of the trap is the one most financial content refuses to talk about honestly. When a couple has children in America, the impact on both partners' careers is not even close to equal, not remotely. The research on this is consistent across countries, across income levels, across industries. Having children is a career setback for mothers and a career booster for fathers. That is not an exaggeration. That is what the data shows. A Columbia University study tracked parents for 6 years following the birth of their first child and found that mothers' earnings were cut nearly in half in the year of the birth, and the penalty persisted through the full 6-year study window. Fathers' earnings in the same period, largely unaffected. In fact, research on what economists call the fatherhood bonus shows that fathers' wages often increase after having children because employers perceive them as more committed, more stable, and more deserving of investment. So while one partner's income is shrinking because of children, the other partner's income is growing because of children. And in most heterosexual couples, you know which partner gets which outcome. The 2024 Bankrate Motherhood Penalty Study found that mothers earn 35% less than fathers, not 35% less than men generally, 35% less than fathers specifically. Each child under 5 years old is projected to reduce a typical mother's earnings by 15%, according to the Institute for Women's Policy Research. Research shows that the motherhood penalty accounts for nearly 80% of the entire gender pay gap. Let me say that again, not 20%, not half, not a contributing factor, 80%. And the ways the penalty shows up aren't always dramatic. Sometimes it's the promotion that didn't happen in the year you came back from maternity leave, even though your performance reviews were the same. Sometimes it's the assignment that went to the colleague who didn't have to leave at 5 to pick up a kid. Sometimes it's the salary negotiation you didn't push as hard on because you were grateful to still have the job. Sometimes it's the role you deliberately chose because it was more flexible, knowing it would be a ceiling rather than a launching pad. These are the invisible tax increases that happen to women's careers in the years when they're simultaneously trying to be present parents and present employees, which is to say, exactly the years when compound interest on career advancement matters most. The Center for American Progress calculated that by the end of a career, the average full-time working woman will have lost $417,400 of income relative to a man with equivalent qualifications. $417,000. That is not a rounding error. That is a retirement account. That is a paid-off house. That is the difference between financial independence at 65 and financial anxiety at 75. And the cruelest part of how this intersects with the two-income trap is this. The household built its financial life assuming both partners would contribute at roughly their current income level or higher over time. The mortgage was underwritten with both incomes in mind. The child care budget was predicated on both incomes remaining intact. But one income, almost always the woman's, is quietly being taxed by the motherhood penalty while the fixed costs stay exactly where they are. And nobody calls it what it is. They call it making choices. They call it prioritizing family. They don't call it what the research says it is, a structural system that makes women bear the financial risk of having the children that society absolutely requires them to have, while paying them less for doing so. Now let's follow this all the way to the finish line, because the two-income trap doesn't just create month-to-month financial stress. It builds toward a retirement crisis that is specific to women and specific to the choices or the structural constraints dressed up as choices that women navigate during their working years. And I want to give you the real numbers here, because the gap is bigger than most people know. Women retire with about 32% less saved than men, according to Morgan Stanley research. Men's 401k balances are about 44% higher than women's, according to Vanguard's analysis, and that gap exists even when both partners are participating in retirement plans at similar rates. What begins as approximately a 20% pay gap early in a woman's career has expanded to a 44% earnings gap by the time she hits her peak earning years, based on BlackRock's analysis of census data. By retirement, the median woman's household retirement income is roughly $10,000 a year, less than the median man's. $10,000 every year. For a woman who will statistically live longer, face higher healthcare costs in old age, and have a greater likelihood of spending her final years alone. 1 in 4 female retirement plan participants has a negative net worth, more debt than assets. 1 in 4. For men, it's 1 in 10. And less than half of women over 25 have saved anything for retirement at all, according to a 2024 national survey. And among those who haven't, 59% say they don't earn enough to save. Not that they don't want to, that they don't earn enough. This is what the two-income trap looks like at the end of a working life. You built your household around 2 incomes. You committed your fixed costs to 2 incomes. Your income was quietly eroded by the motherhood penalty for years, sometimes decades. You possibly reduced your retirement contributions during the tight years with young children because that felt like the most reasonable place to cut. You may have managed the household finances in addition to working full-time, which means you spent your mental energy on survival rather than on investment strategy. And now you're 62 or 65 or 67, and the retirement picture looks materially different for you than it does for your partner. This is not a hypothetical. This is what the data describes happening to millions of women right now. And the two-income trap is not peripheral to this story. It is the story. So what do you actually do about this? Because understanding the trap without a way to build around it is just anxiety on a budget. The good news is that the structural insight that makes the two-income trap a trap also points directly toward the solution. Let me give you 4 things that actually work. The first and most important thing I can tell you is this: run your fixed expenses on 1 income. This is the fundamental principle. Your mortgage, your rent, your car payments, your essential insurance, your fixed monthly obligations, those should be coverable by the lower of your 2 incomes alone. The higher income is your actual wealth-building engine. This doesn't mean you don't use both incomes. It means you structure your life so that if one of those incomes disappears tomorrow, you can survive. You're not immediately in crisis. You have margin. If you cannot currently cover your fixed expenses on 1 income, that is the most important piece of financial information you own right now, and it tells you exactly what to work toward. This might mean not buying at the top of what the mortgage broker approves you for. It might mean the smaller house in the good school district instead of the bigger one in the great school district. It might mean 1 car instead of 2 for a season. These are not failures. These are deliberate choices that protect your financial life from the brittleness that the two-income trap creates. The second thing, and I want you to actually do this, not just nod along, is to calculate the true net value of the second income in your household. Sit down with actual numbers. Take the gross income. Subtract the marginal tax rate on that income in your joint filing. Subtract child care. Subtract transportation costs specifically required for that job. Subtract work-related clothing and expenses. Subtract the convenient spending that exists because that person is working full-time. The takeout, the cleaning service, the grocery delivery. What number do you actually land on? For some of you, this number is going to be much smaller than you thought. For some of you, it might be close to zero. That is not a reason to stop working. Remember what I said about career trajectory, retirement credits, long-term earning power, and financial independence. But it might be a reason to negotiate remote work arrangements, or to reassess the childcare structure, or to identify where the convenient spending can be reduced without sacrificing sanity. You need the real number to make real decisions. Third, and I will not be gentle about this one, your retirement savings cannot be the sacrifice. This is the thing women do that compounds every other disadvantage when the budget gets tight. The retirement contribution is the first thing that gets cut or paused or put on hold until things stabilize. And I completely understand why. It feels like the most logical place to find cash flow. It's not legally required. It doesn't have a due date. It can wait. Except it cannot wait. The motherhood penalty already took something from your earning history that you are not going to fully recover. The two-income trap may have already reduced your long-term financial resilience. The compound interest clock is the one thing that is still working in your favor, but only if you don't stop the contributions. Even during the tight years, even during the childcare years, even when it feels impossible, protect the retirement contribution. Even if it drops from 15% to 8% temporarily, do not stop it entirely. Future you is going to retire in the world that current you is building right now. And fourth, make sure you have your own retirement account. This one is specifically for women in partnerships. Your partner's 401k is not your retirement security. I know you might share everything. I know you feel like what's theirs is yours. But a retirement account has one name on it. And if your relationship ends through divorce, through death, through a circumstance you cannot predict today, you need to have built something in your own name. Divorce is financially devastating for women at much higher rates than for men, largely because of the career interruptions and earnings erosion we just talked about. Having your own IRA, your own 401k, your own financial identity is not pessimism about your relationship. It is basic financial self-preservation. It is the money move that distinguishes financial partnership from financial dependency. There's one more piece to this that I have to address before we close, because it's one of the most common ways the two-income trap goes from uncomfortable to catastrophic. Couples don't talk about money the way they need to. In dual-income households, there's often an unspoken division where each person manages their piece. You handle the groceries and the childcare billing, they handle the mortgage and the utilities. And neither person has a complete picture of the household's actual financial state. Both of you are contributing, both of you feel financially responsible, but nobody has looked at the total fixed expenses relative to the total income and asked, if one of us lost our job tomorrow, how long could we actually survive? How many months of runway do we have? What breaks first? I cannot tell you the number of women who have found themselves in genuinely precarious financial situations, not because they were irresponsible, but because they had outsourced their financial awareness to a partnership that they assumed would be permanent. The two-income trap doesn't just require both incomes to stay intact. It requires the partnership to stay intact. And that is a financial risk that doesn't show up in any budget spreadsheet. Divorce is the #1 driver of financial crisis for middle-class women. The Center for American Progress found that women's household income falls by an average of 41% in the year after a divorce, compared to 9% for men. That is not a small gap. That is a financial cliff. And it is steeper for women because of everything we've been talking about, the motherhood penalty that already eroded the earnings, the career interruptions that reduced the retirement savings, the fact that one partner may have scaled back professionally while the other one built. None of this means your marriage will end. But it means you need to know your own financial situation intimately, have your own financial accounts, and make sure your financial identity is not fully merged with your partner's in a way that leaves you unrecognizable on paper if something changes. Talk about money. Actually talk about it. Not just about who's paying which bill, but about the full picture, where your household stands, what your obligations are relative to your combined income, how much margin you actually have, what both of your retirement trajectories look like, what the plan is if one income disappears. This kind of conversation is uncomfortable. I know, money is uncomfortable, but financial vulnerability is more uncomfortable. The households that navigate the two-income trap successfully aren't the ones with the highest incomes. They're the ones who treated their financial life as a shared project that both partners are fully informed about, fully invested in, and fully capable of managing independently if something changes. That's the kind of financial partnership worth building. Here's what I want you to carry with you from this conversation. The two-income trap is not a failure of your discipline. It is not a result of your bad choices. It is a structural reality that hits hardest on women, especially Black women, who face compounded pay gaps and compounded barriers to wealth. And it operates by design in a system that hasn't caught up to the reality of what dual-earner households actually need to survive. Two incomes can be genuinely powerful, but only when both incomes aren't completely committed to covering fixed costs. Only when both people in the household have their own retirement savings and their own financial identity. Only when the family has margin, the blessed, boring, essential margin that makes the difference between a financial setback and a financial catastrophe. You sat at that kitchen table wondering where the money goes. Now you have a better answer. And more importantly, now you have somewhere to start. If this video opens something up for you today, please like it and share it with a woman in your life who needs to hear this. I'll see you in the next one.